Hello everyone, and welcome to CRPS Contender, my complex regional pain syndrome education channel. Today's video is Twitchy, Spasms, Shakes, and Slack. Today I'm going to be discussing some of the different kinds of contractions you might notice during your experience with CRPS. Now there might be more than what I'm about to explain, but these are the ones that I personally have noticed, and I feel like it's a pretty broad variety, so just know there might be more than this, but I feel like this is a pretty good starting point that will cover a lot of ground. Alright, so the kinds I'm going to cover today are cramping, twitching, tremoring, fluttering, and slack. Let's start with cramping. Cramping's medical term is known as spasticity. Spasticity is the imbalance between the inhibitory and excitatory signals in the nervous system, which causes the areas that are given those signals by the nervous system to lock in place. This could be joints or muscles. This usually feels like cramping, clenching, clamping, or spasming, which affects the entire muscle, which is usually a voluntarily controlled muscle. You may also notice that you have hyperactive reflexes which persist for too long and may be too strong. Spasticity can cause muscle stiffness, muscle spasms, clonus, which are those rapid involuntary spasms, muscle fatigue, which is a state of exhaustion, inhibition of the longitudinal muscle growth, which is the muscles that run lengthwise of your body, and inhibition of protein synthesis in muscles, which means it is difficult for muscles to be repaired or built. Spasticity can occur at any time, but is especially common during overuse, stress, fatigue, extreme weather, whether that's hot or cold, humidity, tight clothing, nutrient deficiency, and or dehydration. While you do not have control over many of these, some of these you do have control over, especially dehydration, nutrient deficiency, and tight clothing. Those three are definitely things you can do on your own, and you have complete control over those. Let's move on to the next one. Twitching. Twitching is muscle fasciculation. This is stimulation of or damage to nerves, which causes muscle fibers to twitch spontaneously. This is an involuntary, rapid contraction and relaxation. Muscle fasciculation involves fine movements of a small portion of a larger muscle. This happens at the tip of the nerve, which is known as the axon, when they are overly sensitive to firing, and so the firing threshold has kind of been reduced. This can occur at any time, and is more likely to occur during lactic acid accumulation, stress, when you have stimulants in your system, when you have a nutrient deficiency, when you're dehydrated, if you have nicotine in your system, when you're having an adverse reaction to drugs, when you have spinal muscular atrophy, which is damage to the spinal cord motor neurons, or certain kinds of dystrophies. Now, usually they're talking about muscular dystrophies here, but I do just want to make a quick reminder that CRPS used to be called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. While the muscular dystrophy is not exactly the same thing as reflex sympathetic dystrophy, I did want to include it there just to help get some brain connections going there. Alright, the next one is tremoring. This is dystonia. And this is a pretty big one for CRPS patients. Probably most of you are dealing with this. Dystonia is unintentional, uncontrollable, rhythmic movements, which can occur at any part of the body at any time, causing repetitive twisting or shaking movements. Dystonia can force the body into abnormal and sometimes painful movements, positions, and postures, which may be sustained or intermittent and in varying severity. Usually this does not involve muscle weakness. There are many different kinds of dystonia, and I've got a list on my source sheet. You're welcome to check those out. But there's just a couple that I want to go over which have more to do with the area of the body rather than the kind of dystonia one is experiencing. So, if you've got dystonia in just one singular area on your body, this is known as focal dystonia. If you have it in two or more adjacent areas, this is segmental dystonia. If you have it in two or more unrelated areas, this is multifocal dystonia. If you have it in an arm and a leg on the same side of the body, this is hemidystonia. And if you have it over your entire body, this is general dystonia. While there is not a agreed upon solid source of dystonia, it is likely due to problems with the cerebellum or the basal ganglia. Both of these areas have to do with motor and movement control. Neurotransmitter activity may also play a role in dystonia. The next type of twitching you might notice is fluttering. Now this is due to vasospasms, and for the record, I am going to do at least 2 more videos specifically about vasospasms because they are very important in CRPS, but for now I'm just going to keep it short. Vessels, usually arteries and microvessels like capillaries, contract, get blocked, which means they are not allowing blood to make it through. This means they starve the area that those vessels go to of blood, nutrients, and they don't remove waste, so things, especially things like reactive oxygen species, can build up, which are pretty damaging. The vessels then overdilate to compensate for getting blocked and flood the area that was starved with blood. Vasospasms are highly damaging to the affected tissue, and this is an ischemia reperfusion injury. Again, I am going to have a whole nother video about this, but if you want to check this out on your own in my source sheet below, I have it marked as the most relevant one, but it's specifically about CRPS and traumatic vasospasms. It's called What's in a Name. If you are capable of reading heavier papers and materials, academic papers like that, I definitely recommend checking it out, even if you can't make it all the way through. It's got some really great stuff in there, and it will definitely, I think, broaden your understanding of CRPS as a whole. Vasospasms, at least in my view, usually feel like butterfly wings. I don't normally notice it myself near the smaller vessels that are affected, which are the ones that are more often affected, but especially for me, my CRPS is in my leg. I definitely notice this in the major arteries that run down into my thigh. It's the vessel opening and closing, and that's what you're feeling, and it kind of feels like a butterfly flapping its wings. It's not very strong. I would say out of all of these, this is the least strong, but the most detrimental to the individual. Vasospasms are similar to compartment syndrome. This is going to be the other video I'm going to do comparing these vasospasms in CRPS to compartment syndrome. If you don't know what compartment syndrome is, I'm not really going to get too into it right now, but basically compartment syndrome is where you have extreme vasospasms over a very short period of time, and you only have a few hours to deal with this, really. If you can't get it under control, the individual is going to lose that limb. It's going to die on them, and you'll have to remove it. Okay, so CRPS is similar, but not the same. They both have those vasospasms, but CRPS is a more moderate vasospasm over a very extended period of time. Again, they're both pretty damaging, but compartment syndrome is more easy to see because it's a much more immediate need, and so it's easier to diagnose and deal with, rather where CRPS is, it likes to fly under the radar. These traumatic vasospasms were a hypothesis presented by Foisy in 1947 for the pathophysiology of CRPS, and it has been included in the 2018 dendritic cell hypothesis by Russo's team, which is the hypothesis that I personally support. Okay, I'm going to leave that there for now, because I kind of want to get into it more, but I'm going to move on. But I am going to come back and do 2 different videos on this. One specifically on the ischemia reperfusion injuries, and another one comparing CRPS vasospasms to compartment syndrome. And that will be in the future. Alright, and this last one here is slack, which doesn't actually have to do with muscle contraction, but instead has to do with complete loss of muscle tone. This is most likely caused by isolated cataplexy, which is a brief loss of voluntary muscle tone where the muscles go limp or weaken significantly. This is often triggered by stress or very, very strong emotions. Cataplexic episodes can vary in intensity, which can be mild with things like twitching eyelids, drooping face, or dropping your head for a moment. Moderate, which is things like dropping what is in your hands, or more severe, like your knees giving out or fully collapsing. Isolated cataplexy is not a seizure. The individual remains fully conscious and aware of their environment during cataplexic episodes. Even in the most severe cases, they retain the ability to move their eyes and breathe. So you do not need to be concerned that the individual is going to have any real long-term damage from this. And usually the episodes last between, just a few seconds to a couple minutes, and then they'll kind of come out of it. So don't be too concerned if this happens. Just make sure they're in a safe area, especially if they've fallen down, that they haven't banged their head on anything or whatnot. I'm saying this to the people with CRPS as if you have any control of being able... If you feel it coming on, it's like, oh, I'm probably going to fall. Try and fall in a way where you're not going to bang your head on something. Another thing that's really helpful for this is learning how to really deal with your strong emotions. This is self-regulation rather than self-control. Again, I'm going to do another video on that. Once your emotions hit a certain threshold, you just kind of collapse. But if your emotions don't hit that threshold, well, then the episode might be more mild, or you just might not have an episode at all. So learning how to deal with your emotions so you don't hit that threshold is really important. I'm going to be honest, this is one of the things that really made me start, because I'm a pretty controlling person, and I really didn't like completely collapsing in the middle of what I was doing whenever I'd get worked up. So this is something that really motivated me, because I did not like it when I had episodes. And I still have mild episodes, definitely, but nothing severe where I'm like fully collapsing anymore. So definitely recommend working on the emotional aspect of this if you are experiencing isolated cataplexy. If you want to know more about the specific kind of science behind this, I have another video on this called Hypocratic Holes. I was going through a pretty rough time when I made that one, so it's very much more academic essay style and dry, which is truly my inner self. I try to usually make videos at least a bit more interesting, but that one is not. It does have good information though, so if you want to check that one out, that's in my homepage. I'll try and connect it at the end too on the final slide page. So, quick recap here. We have cramping, which is spasticity. We have twitching, which is muscle fasciculation. We have tremoring, which is dystonia. We have fluttering, which is vasospasms. And we have slack, which is likely isolated cataplexy. Now again, you might experience other things as well, but I feel like this is a pretty good broad starting point to be able to really start to identify what's going on in your body. If you're noticing a couple different ones of these, I definitely recommend starting a little daily notebook. So when you notice things like that, you can make just a little jot. You don't have to get too specific, but just, it's hard to remember things with CRPS. You have a record. You know what was happening. You I had a cataplexic episode and I was really sad, or I was very angry, or, I felt the fluttering in my hand for 7 seconds. Or, I was experiencing dystonia today all day long. Or I had muscle fasciculation going on, and it was on and off, but it happened all day, and it was really affecting my calf on the outside, just a few seconds at a time, for 6 hours. Things like that can really be assistive in knowing what your body is doing, so that you can feel more in control of what's going on, even though you can't make it stop. Going to be able to be more assistive in being able to predict what your body's going to want to do, so that you can be prepared for it, so it can help you accept it, and so in some cases, you might be able to mitigate it or prevent it from happening at all. Again, you are not in complete control here of what is going on, but there are things that you can do to take back some control of the situation, and even if you can't, be able to predict it so that you aren't in a constant state of fear, which is going to make all of these much, much worse, because they have to do with stress. And when you are afraid, you are stressed. Hopefully, this was at least a bit helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching. You are welcome to share any videos I produce here. Hit that subscribe button if you like what I'm doing. If you'd like to contribute to my Patreon is listed below. As always, relevant sources are linked in the description. If you only read one of the sources on my source sheet, read that what's in a name about the vasospasms. It is marked on the side as being the most relevant one. Okay, I think that is everything. I'm going to link that Hippocratic Holes here in the bottom right. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time.